Aarav Mishral, a promising young law student, Niyara Mishral, the graceful wife of a respected businessman, and Raghav Mishral, the brother who trusted them both. In the heart of Kanpur, their lives collided in a web of betrayal, forbidden love, and murder. What began as a complicated bond behind closed doors would soon explode into one of the most shocking scandals society had ever witnessed. In Kanpur, a city known for its crowded markets, noisy streets, and families bound by tradition, the Mishral household stood tall as one of respect and dignity. Raghav Mishral, the elder son of the family, had earned a name for himself in the textile business. People often spoke about his discipline, his sharp business sense, and the way he carried forward the family's honor. His wife, Niyara, was equally admired. With her graceful personality, refined manners, and calm presence, she was often called the pride of the family. To outsiders, their home seemed ideal, filled with harmony, prosperity, and the warmth of tradition. But behind the closed doors of the Mishral home, cracks were beginning to form. Cracks that would eventually grow into something far more dangerous. Aarav Mishral, Raghav's younger brother, lived with them while pursuing his studies in law. At first, he was considered the carefree one, always busy with books, friends, and dreams of building his future. But over time, something changed. Aarav found himself drawn to Niyara in ways he could not control. It began innocently, a casual conversation here, a shared laugh there, but slowly those moments started to mean much more to him. For Aarav, Niyara wasn't just his elder brother's wife. She became a figure of fascination, someone whose presence stirred emotions he had never experienced before. Niyara herself was not immune to these shifts. Though she carried the image of a perfect wife and daughter-in-law, deep inside she struggled with loneliness. Raghav, absorbed in his work, often returned home late at night. His conversations with her had become mechanical, more about responsibilities than affection. While she never complained, the emptiness began to grow heavier with each passing day. Aarav's youthful energy, his attention, and the way he seemed to notice small details about her filled that void. It was dangerous, and she knew it, but a part of her craved the warmth that she no longer received from her husband. At first, their bond was unspoken. There were only glances exchanged across the dining table, moments when their hands brushed while serving food, or the way Aarav's eyes lingered longer than they should have. These silent gestures, unnoticed by others, created a current between them that neither dared to address openly. They justified it in their minds, telling themselves it was harmless, that they were only family members who understood each other. But deep down, both knew they were stepping onto fragile ground. Neighbors and relatives who frequently visited the Mishral home occasionally caught subtle hints. Aarav was always quick to be at Niyara's side, whether it was helping her carry groceries or assisting with household chores. While outsiders dismissed it as respect for his sister-in-law, those with sharper eyes sensed something different, a closeness that seemed to stretch beyond the boundaries of tradition. Yet no one dared to speak openly, for the Mishral name carried weight in Kanpur's society, and gossip could ruin reputations in an instant. Niyara's childhood friend, Megha Solanki, visited her often. Megha knew Niyara better than anyone, and was quick to sense when something was amiss. She noticed how Niyara's tone softened whenever Aarav entered the room, how her eyes followed him, and how Aarav seemed restless when she was away. Megha tried to ignore it at first, convincing herself it was just her imagination, but the feeling that something was wrong only grew stronger. She wanted to confront Niyara but hesitated, fearing it might break their friendship or worse, drag her into a scandal. Within the house, Raghav remained unaware, at least on the surface. His busy schedule kept him occupied, and he believed his home was safe, his wife loyal, and his younger brother focused on his career. He had no reason to doubt them, and that trust became the very cover that Aarav and Niyara unknowingly depended upon. As days turned into weeks, the silent attraction grew heavier. Every shared smile carried meaning, Every moment alone became charged with unspoken emotions. The air inside the Mishral home was thick with tension, though no one spoke of it. What had begun as a flicker was turning into a fire. Aarav wrestled with guilt, reminding himself that he was betraying his own brother. But the pull of his feelings was stronger than logic. Niyara, too, found herself walking a dangerous line, torn between duty and desire. In Kanpur's society, where appearances mattered more than truth, the Mishral family still shone like a picture of unity. But inside their home, the seeds of a storm had already been planted, waiting for the right moment to erupt. What looked like respect, affection, and family loyalty from the outside was in fact the beginning of a tangled story that would shake not only their household, but also the entire community that looked up to them. As the months slipped by in the Mishral household, the undercurrent between Aarav and Niyara deepened into something far more dangerous than either of them had expected. What had once been fleeting glances and unspoken moments began transforming into stolen opportunities and secret rendezvous. The quiet bond that they shared behind closed doors grew bolder, though still cloaked in silence. Every gesture carried weight, every look lasted a little longer than it should, and the space between them narrowed. Their relationship was no longer an invisible thread, it was a secret flame, burning steadily in the shadows of Kanpur's traditions. For Niyara, the days felt like a balancing act. On one side stood her role as the perfect wife and daughter-in-law, a position she carried with practiced grace. On the other, she felt a growing need to hold on to the moments she shared with Aarav. Her husband Raghav's absence became more frequent, with business trips and late hours keeping him away. The emptiness in her marriage became more apparent, making the time she spent with Aarav feel intoxicating. He listened, he cared, and above all, he saw her in a way Raghav no longer did. What had begun as companionship was now a dangerous affair of emotions, one that she tried to justify to herself, but could not control. Aarav, meanwhile, found himself consumed by feelings he could neither resist nor hide. At first, he convinced himself that his closeness to Niyara was natural, that it was nothing more than respect and admiration. But as days passed, his excuses crumbled. He began planning ways to spend more time with her, offering to accompany her on errands, staying back from his own plans just to be near her, and taking on tasks at home that gave him a reason to linger in her presence. His devotion grew obsessive, and in his heart, he believed what they shared was real and justified. The outside world, however, had begun to notice small cracks in the illusion of perfection. Neighbors whispered quietly among themselves, recalling moments when Aarav and Niyara were seen together in places where a Devar and Bhabhi were not expected to be alone. A fruit vendor remembered them sharing a hushed conversation by his stall. A distant relative mentioned how their eyes seemed too familiar during family gatherings. While most brushed it off, attributing it to exaggerated gossip, the whispers began spreading through Kanpur's narrow lane. Megha Solanki, Niyara's childhood friend, found herself more troubled than anyone else. Every time she visited, she noticed details others overlooked. The way Aarav stood too close, the way Niyara's expression softened, or how quickly Aarav appeared whenever Niyara called. Megha's suspicions grew into certainty, but she struggled with what to do. Confronting Niyara risked breaking trust, yet remaining silent meant watching her friend walk into something destructive. Her dilemma became heavier with each visit, and though she said nothing, her unease was written across her face. Inside the Mishral home, Raghav continued with his life unaware of the storm gathering around him. His trust in both his wife and his younger brother blinded him to the signs that others had begun to notice. He believed in the traditions of his household, convinced that loyalty and respect were unshakable pillars. While he worked tirelessly for the family business, the betrayal beneath his own roof grew stronger. His silence and trust became the perfect shield behind which Aarav and Niyara hid their secret. The affair, though hidden, carried with it a growing tension. The stolen moments that once felt thrilling now carried fear. Each meeting came with the risk of being discovered. Every secret exchange could lead to disaster, yet the danger only fueled the fire between them. The thrill of secrecy made the connection feel even more irresistible. They told themselves that no one would ever know, that what existed between them was invisible to the world. But deep inside, both understood that such secrets rarely stayed buried. In a society like Kanpur's, where reputation was everything, and tradition demanded unquestionable loyalty, even the smallest hint of impropriety could destroy lives. For Aarav and Niyara, the bond they had nurtured in silence was already turning into a burden too heavy to conceal. With each passing day, their secret became more fragile, as though the entire weight of society pressed down on it, waiting for the first crack to appear. What they failed to see was that the crack had already formed, and when it widened, it would not only expose their relationship, but also bring with it consequences neither of them was prepared to face. Raghav Mishral had always believed that his home was a place of trust, where loyalty and tradition ruled above everything else. Yet, as time passed, he began to sense that something was not as it should be. At first, the signs were small, easy to dismiss. Niyara had become distracted, her thoughts seemingly elsewhere. Aarav, who once spent long hours buried in his law books, now appeared more at home than ever, always close to Niyara's side. What seemed like harmless family affection began to gnaw at Raghav's mind. He told himself not to overthink, but the unease grew stronger with each passing day. The first real seed of suspicion was planted one evening, when Raghav returned home earlier than usual. Expecting to find his wife in the kitchen and his brother studying, he instead noticed them seated together in the courtyard, speaking in hushed tones. The sight unsettled him, though neither appeared guilty. When they saw him, they quickly stood up, as though caught off guard. Niyara explained that Aarav was helping her plan something for the house, but the explanation felt hollow. Raghav said nothing at the time, yet the image of their closeness lingered in his mind long after. From that day forward, he began paying closer attention. He noticed how Aarav and Niyara exchanged glances across the dining table, how their silences were heavy with meaning, and how quickly they seemed to find excuses to be near one another. It was subtle, carefully hidden, but for a man who had lived his entire life in the company of his wife and brother, the change was undeniable. Each detail, once invisible, now stood out like a warning sign. Raghav's mind grew restless. His trust in his wife and his love for his younger brother collided with the unsettling possibility of betrayal. At times he wanted to confront them, to demand answers, but fear held him back. What if it was only his imagination, and confronting them would only cause unnecessary shame? And yet, what if he was right? The questions haunted him, keeping him awake at night, as he replayed every small incident in his head. His suspicions sharpened one particular evening. Aarav had claimed he was going to the library, but Raghav by chance spotted him walking hurriedly through a quiet lane. Raghav followed from a distance, and to his shock he saw Aarav meeting Niyara at a secluded corner near the marketplace. They spoke briefly, their faces close, their voices low, and then separated quickly. It was enough. Raghav's worst fears were confirmed in that moment. What he had dismissed as doubt was now an undeniable reality. The revelation shook him to his core. Betrayal, especially within the sacred structure of family, cut deeper than any wound. Raghav returned home in silence, his face calm but his heart in turmoil. He began watching them more closely, collecting the pieces of their secret. The once proud man who believed in honor and family now found himself living inside a web of lies. His trust had been shattered, and with it, the foundation of his life. Instead of confronting them openly, Raghav chose to remain quiet. Outwardly, he behaved the same, sharing meals, attending social events, maintaining the image of a perfect family. But inside he was consumed by anger, grief, and humiliation. He began planning in secret, his thoughts turning darker with each day. If society were to discover the truth before he acted, it would not only ruin his reputation, but also mark his entire family with shame. In his mind, only one solution remained: to deal with the matter himself, without the world knowing. Meanwhile, Aarav and Niyara remained blind to the storm forming within their own house. They continued their risky closeness, unaware that Raghav had seen what they believed was hidden. The household still functioned as though nothing was wrong, but beneath the surface, tension brewed with every passing moment. The air grew heavier, conversations colder, and silence more dangerous. Kanpur's society looked at the Mishral family and saw unity, wealth, and respect. But behind those walls, betrayal had planted itself firmly, and Raghav, once a man of patience and trust, was transforming into something else entirely. He was no longer a husband doubting his wife, or a brother suspecting betrayal. He was now a man quietly preparing to reclaim his honor, no matter the cost. The night that would change everything began with a heavy storm rolling over Kanpur. The sky was dark, lightning split through the clouds, and rain pelted against the walls of the Mishral residence. Inside the large home, silence stretched through the corridors, broken only by the occasional rumble of thunder. For neighbors, the house stood as a picture of dignity, but that night it became the stage for a tragedy that would shatter its very foundation. Raghav Mishral had spent the entire day in quiet reflection. His eyes had grown colder over the weeks, his voice sharper, though he never allowed anger to show openly. His decision had already been made. To the world he still played the part of the respected businessman and loyal husband, but inside he was a man consumed by betrayal, humiliation, and rage. For him, the time for observation was over. The storm outside matched the storm within, and he was ready to act. Aarav returned home late, claiming to have been at the library. He appeared calm, unaware that Raghav's eyes followed his every move. Niyara sat quietly in her room, her face pale as she pretended to read. Though neither Aarav nor Niyara sensed the exact moment danger would strike, both carried a sense of unease. Perhaps it was the storm, or perhaps it was their guilty conscience, but they did not know that Raghav had already planned the night with precision. The house grew quieter as the night deepened. Servants had gone to their quarters, and only the three remained awake. At some point, Raghav retreated to his study, a place where he often spent hours going over business records. But this time, he was not reading contracts or signing papers. On the desk lay a belt, one that had been carefully chosen, strong enough to do what he intended. His hands traced over it slowly, his face expressionless. At midnight, a sudden sound echoed, a muffled cry, quickly silent. The storm outside masked much of the noise, but those close enough would later recall hearing faint thuds and something that sounded like a struggle. Behind the locked doors of the study, Raghav had confronted his younger brother in a fury that had been building for months. The confrontation did not last long. Aarav, caught off guard, had little chance to defend himself against his elder brother's wrath. The belt tightened around his throat, and with it came the end of his resistance. His final gasps faded into the storms. When the door was eventually forced open by horrified neighbors who had heard screams, it was too late. Inside the study, Raghav Mishral's lifeless body lay sprawled across the floor. His face bore marks of the struggle, his hands clenched tightly as though still gripping invisible threads of anger. The belt lay beside him, stained and twisted, a silent witness to the violence that had erupted within the walls of his own home. The sight sent shockwaves through the neighborhood. How could such a respected man meet such an end? And inside his own house, rumors spread immediately. Some whispered of burglars, others of a violent fight. But one detail was clear to everyone: there was no sign of forced entry. The killer had not come from outside. He was already within those walls. Inspector Devkant Rao arrived with his team before dawn. Known for his sharp instincts, Rao quickly began piecing together the scene. His eyes scanned the study, the lack of broken windows, the locked door, the absence of any missing valuable. To him, the crime was not random. It was intimate, personal, fueled by emotion, rather than greed. Questions quickly turned toward Aarav and Niyara. Their presence in the house, their closeness noticed by neighbors, and the timing of the tragedy painted a damning picture. Though they denied knowledge, suspicion wrapped tightly around them, like the storm's clouds. Every look between them seemed loaded with secrets. Every hesitation, a signal of guilt. By morning, Kanpur was buzzing with the news. A man as respected as Raghav Mishral, murdered within his own home, and whispers of scandal involving his wife and brother. This was more than gossip. It was a scandal that struck at the heart of tradition and honor. Families across the city spoke in hushed tones, wondering how such betrayal could unfold in a household that seemed so perfect. The Mishral residence, once a symbol of pride, had now become a place of horror. The body had been taken away, but the walls still held the echoes of violence, the air still heavy with betrayal. The storm outside eventually passed, leaving the streets washed clean. But inside the Mishral family, the damage was irreversible. A crime of passion had been committed, and the truth behind it was only beginning to unfold. Inspector Devkant Rao knew from the moment he entered the Mishral residence that this was not a simple murder. The absence of forced entry, the calculated use of a belt, and the sheer intensity of the violence, all pointed to emotions running deeper than mere anger. As he studied the faces of those inside the house, his eyes lingered on Aarav and Niyara. Their silence was telling, their expressions guarded. They had not only lost Raghav, but also carried the weight of knowing something more than they admitted. For Rao, the investigation had only one direction to move toward: the hidden truth between the surviving members of the Mishral family. The neighbors were quick to speak of what they had observed over the months. Some recalled how Aarav and Niyara were often seen together in places where it was unusual for a Devar-Bhabhi to be. Others spoke of how Raghav had grown distant in recent weeks, his face strained, his mood dark. Bits of gossip painted a picture of tension inside the household, one that no longer matched the image of unity the family projected to society. Rao listened carefully, piecing together fragments into something that began to look like motive. Megha Solanki, Niyara's childhood friend, became the turning point in the investigation. She approached the police hesitantly, her conscience torn between loyalty to her friend and the weight of truth. In her statement, she admitted that she had long suspected Niyara's closeness with Aarav. She described how Niyara often confided about feeling neglected in her marriage, and how she hinted at the comfort she found in Aarav's attention. Megha confessed that she had ignored these signs for too long, fearing what they could mean. Now, with Raghav dead, she could no longer remain silent. With Megha's testimony, Inspector Rao began pressing harder. He uncovered phone records that showed frequent late-night calls between Aarav and Niyara. He also learned about secret meetings in marketplaces and quiet corners, where they believed they were hidden from view. Piece by piece, the story emerged. Niyara had grown restless in her marriage, and Aarav, blinded by youthful desire, had fallen into her trap. But there was more to it than just an affair. Money and control appeared as strong motives. Raghav's business, his property, and his wealth stood as a silent prize, waiting for someone bold enough to claim it. When Rao confronted Aarav with the evidence, the young man's resolve began to crack. Days of questioning wore him down, until finally he confessed. His words spilled out in guilt and desperation. He admitted that he had fallen in love with Niyara, that she had convinced him Raghav would never let them be together, and that the only way to secure a future was to remove him from their lives. Aarav revealed how the plan was carefully crafted, how Niyara fed his anger, how she whispered promises of a life they could build once Raghav was gone. In his heart, Aarav believed he was acting for love, but in truth he had been used as a weapon. Niyara, when confronted, showed none of the weakness that Aarav displayed. She remained calm, even cold, her voice steady as she denied involvement. Yet the evidence against her was mounting. Letters written by her in moments of carelessness, bank records showing secret transfers, and witnesses who recalled seeing her with Aarav, sealed her role in the plot. Her lack of emotion only strengthened the image of her as the manipulator,
the one who had orchestrated everything from behind the scenes. The trial that followed gripped Kanpur. Courtrooms were packed with people eager to hear every detail of the scandal that had destroyed one of the city's most respected families. The prosecution painted a chilling picture of betrayal, a wife who manipulated her husband's younger brother, a brother who betrayed the man who raised him, and a conspiracy born of greed and desire. Aarav sat broken, his face etched with regret, while Niyara remained defiant, her eyes cold as though society's judgment meant nothing to her. In the end, justice was served. Aarav received a long prison sentence, punished for the crime he carried out in the name of love. Niyara, the mastermind who had manipulated two brothers, was sentenced to life imprisonment. The judgment was a relief to many, but it could not erase the stain left on the Mishral name. The once proud family, held as an example of honor and tradition, had been reduced to whispers and cautionary tales. The city of Kanpur carried the memory of the case for years to come. People spoke of how betrayal could hide behind the mask of respectability, how love twisted into obsession could destroy everything, and how greed disguised as affection could lead to death. The Mishral residence, once filled with laughter and dignity, stood as a silent reminder of how easily a family's legacy could be consumed by secrets. What had begun as a complicated relationship ended as one of the most chilling scandals the city had ever seen.